Hey, I'm Michael. I'm back with Prison Professor, and our guest today is George Manlove, a former CEO of a company that did north of $150 million in revenues. He found himself the target of a criminal investigation, and today he's going to talk with us a little bit about what it was like when he had to go out into the market and find a criminal defense attorney. George, do you remember that day when you had to do that?
Oh, absolutely. It was like it was yesterday.
Have you ever had to work with a criminal defense attorney before in your life?
No, I haven't, and I didn't. I didn't know that there was a difference between a civil attorney and a criminal attorney. So, what I did was went to the counsel that handled our civil case, and then talked to them about preparing for defense. And as it turns out, that company had a conflict because they represented the company that I used to work for. So they could no longer, anybody in their firm could no longer represent me. So I asked them for some referrals in the state, a small state for that matter, of who I should be considering.
And what was your process for interviewing criminal defense attorneys?
Well, I followed up on the referrals that were given to me, and unfortunately, in the state that I live in, there's very few criminal defense attorneys. So there's maybe a handful of what have good reputations, maybe 3 or 4. And 2 of them already had a conflict with, they couldn't represent me. The third one was a firm out of another city that had very large case that they didn't have the bandwidth to help us out at all. And then we were recommended to someone else, and we made an introduction there and met with them.
When you met with a criminal defense attorney, what did he tell you about the options that you had going forward? What was your level of understanding with what different options, which different directions you could go?
It was a little bit of a surprise to me because after we had some introductory discussion and talked about fees, the first thing we talked about was fees and what it was going to cost. And
what did you anticipate when you started?
Well, I was told it was going to be $250,000 to go to trial.
And were you adamant about going to trial from the start?
Yes.
Did you understand that there might be other options, or were those just off the table for you?
Well, I had a little bit of a unique situation. I had a co-defendant, and the government decided that they would go pursue him first and try to get him to plea in an effort to cooperate for better conditions for himself. So at that time, all the attorneys I talked to, the first thing that they discussed, what they really want to discuss, is a plea agreement. We should do a plea agreement right away.
And what were your thoughts about a plea agreement?
My wife and I were adamant that we wanted to go to trial because we had never had the opportunity throughout the civil or criminal case to tell our story. I never once talked to anybody from the government until I had a chance to testify at the criminal trial.
What kind of case was it? What kind of charges were you facing?
The kitchen sink. Everything that they potentially could muster up a charge for, they did. Was charged with 221 counts.
Oh my God. Wire fraud, mail fraud, security
fraud, everything. So if I was to have a check sent via wire transfer, that's wire fraud. If I was to transfer money from one bank account to another, that was money laundering. Mm-hmm. And it went on and on and on. So all the individual accounts were a result of real estate leases. So every single month over 5 years was a charge.
So you said it was a $250,000 quote to go to trial. Now you're looking back, several years have passed. How much did it cost you to make that decision to go to trial?
I'm not sure yet because we're not finished yet, but it would be north of it would be in the neighborhood of $750,000.
So nearly three
And that's
times.
just fees. That's just fees.
Yeah, nearly three times what you initially anticipated. And had you ventured into game theorying out, what's the difference between pleading guilty, cutting a deal, going to trial, and had you cut a deal, do you have any idea of what type of time you would have been facing?
I had no idea because we really never had a plea agreement offered to us, and our attorneys didn't feel that they would budge at all, so he didn't have any interest in talking to them about a plea agreement.
I really hope that you had the best representation. I know a lot of attorneys fight valiantly for their clients. Unfortunately, there's a lot of attorneys who just really want to get those billable hours. And sometimes, although it may be in their interest to go to trial with a deep pocket client, it's not always in the best interest of the client. Did you take any steps to figure out or to get information from other people who had gone through the system and get any guidance from them?
Absolutely. I have some attorney friends that live out of state, and we discussed it at length. And I think to a person, they said that, once you're indicted and there's charges filed, and that the kitchen sink charges that were filed against me and my co-defendant, the odds of you succeeding at trial are little or none.
So you did get that type of guidance, yet you still pursued a trial. Why was that, George? Or did that advice come to you too late?
Well, I think for quite a while we had felt that, like a lot of people, that we didn't do anything wrong, and these charges were fabricated, and they were. I was a person of interest, and the government had their eye on me, and as a result of that, they wanted to make an example of me for other potential defendants that in the future.
I know that you've still got an ongoing appeal, and you're looking forward to having your liberty vindicated. And I wish you the highest level of success through that. But what I'd also like to do is get your take for somebody else who's facing an indictment or who is having to wrestle with the decision of how to move forward with a criminal defense attorney. What type of advice would you give to that fellow?
Well, what I should have done, and what I would recommend to other people, is early on I would try to understand what the sentencing guidelines were. It wasn't till probably the middle to the end of the trial till I really understood what the sentencing guidelines that I was facing with, especially after the pre-sentence report that was done.
Not only the length of sentence, but also it's all the ancillary consequences that follow a criminal indictment. I suspect could have been very helpful to you to understand, because it can affect your family, it can influence your health, it can influence your livelihood. It certainly could influence 3x what the attorney initially quoted you for going to trial. There are just so many ramifications that come when an individual puts the government to the test, and sometimes it's just good medicine to listen to what other people have experienced.
Well, what I discovered is the harder you fight, the more aggressive they get. And they want you to pay for their defense costs. They want you to pay for court fees. They want you to pay for witness fees. So the sentencing in itself is one thing. It's what comes after that with forfeiture and restitution and court fees, and that lives with you forever.
Well, I have a lot of admiration for you, because you've managed to weather this storm with your dignity intact and a solid plan going forward. In our introduction, which we just filmed the video, you spoke about building a new business despite having your life spinning out of control. And I know you've got some solid plans for the future. And in the next episode, we're going to talk a little bit about what steps you took to prepare for the journey ahead after you found out that you were sentenced to 5 years. Is that all right?
Yes, it is.
Awesome. I'll call you right back. Thanks.
Thank you.
Back soon.